Greetings, everyone, from Japan. Not really, of course, but it's a nice image. Given what I'm going to speak about today, I thought you might enjoy it. But a temple in Tokyo. So a few more people are arriving. So let's begin our sitting together. Imagine the big bells being rung. As we sit, you might simply allow your attention to rest on your breath. Nothing more is really needed. Even one breath with full intimacy is the wholeness of our meditation. Receiving the world on the in-breath and releasing on the out-breath. Whatever the words or sentiment, taking in the world and offering yourself back. Just this simple breath meditation, as Donna Martin taught me. It's enough. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. It's wonderful to see all of you, and I see some of you in small groups, like Darren Lancaster. I think, oh, they can hear each other chant. It's so nice. Hear each other's voice. Uh, Part of the reason that I'm sitting in the background is because I wanted to do something a little different today in a way. It's basically been 6 months since Peg and I completed the Dharma transmission ceremonies. And I wanted to reflect a little bit on um, the teachings of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who was as we know, the teacher around whom the San Francisco Zen Center grew, although wasn't his intention or what he started to do. So I'm just going to offer some small reflections as a way to um, bring to life really the chant that we just did. And these were reflections, of an old teacher that I never met. Um, but he was the teacher that my root teacher studied with. And so these, the words are like echoes that come from the past, because he's been gone for 50 years, 51 years coming up. And this is an interesting piece of information if you don't know, a piece of trivia. The group who ended up being the San Francisco Zen Center, starting from just a few hippies at Sokiji, the Japanese temple that he started when he was attending to the Japanese population in San Francisco, then to City Center. They had him for a total of 12 years. That's all. So an interesting number of years. And look what came out of those few years because of what his students carried forward. So these small moments I want to share are expressions of a traditional Zen master speaking to American students mostly. But strangely, the words seem fresh, not ancient. Because he was this bridge between the Asian monastic system and the Western arrival of Zen. Among many, he was just one of those roots. And now we are the bridge that keeps the practice alive and vital at this time. And that's our responsibility as it was for him. I do want to tell one of my own stories. All the ones I'm going to reflect on are not mine. And this is one that many of you have heard, but it's really important, I think, to be reminded of it. When I was fortunate to go with Blanche and also Mel Weissman to Japan for a month to practice together, we ended up going to Eiheiji and Sojiji, the two main temples of the Soto sect. And when we were at Eiheiji, which is the Dogen's temple that he founded, we were introduced when we arrived to Matsunaga Roshi, who was the head of international relations for the Soto Zen at that time. And he had known Suzuki Roshi. They had been not exactly contemporaries because Matsunaga was still alive, but they knew each other at Eiheiji. And so there were about 18 of us in the group, and we met him and did some formalities, then went to sit in the zendo. So we're all sitting on a tan, one of the raised platforms, on our cushions facing the wall. And we're sitting there for a bit, like we just were in silence. And then we could hear the door open. But we're facing the wall. And so at the end of this long line that we're sitting in at the time, I could see out of the corner of my eye, trying to remain upright and still, I see someone come in, and it was Matsunaga. And he said in English, when Shunryu Suzuki left Japan in 1959 and came to the United States and then began to meet with American students, the hippies and everything that happened in the 60s and 70s in San Francisco, he said, I could not understand what he was doing. From his perspective, it didn't make any sense. And he paused and he said, today, I see what he was doing. And then silently he left, us weeping. English was a second language. Think about this. Imagine that you're 55 years old, you've lived in one culture all your life, and suddenly you're transported to Japan, and you have to learn this language, which is a completely different kind of language, and then teach and work with Japanese students in their language. That's what he did, coming this way. It's really remarkable. You feel his constancy. And so he uses English in a little different way sometimes, although the little vignettes I'm going to offer are edited a bit. And the funny thing is, as he speaks, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like he's saying something I've always known somewhere inside, but I'd have the words to say. Maybe he was speaking from the borrowed voices of his American students at that time, you know. But this voice goes straight to our hearts. Sometimes with humor, he's very funny, and insight, and sometimes with a surprisingly powerful but gentle kind of confrontation. Sometimes with invitation and encouragement, always with compassion and truth. So I've chosen, I know this sounds like a lot, they're small, 27 little tiny vignettes out of like 150 or whatever in the book, which was originally titled To Shine One Corner of the Universe. And I'll tell you what that is later. Because there's a new title now. If you order it on Amazon, it's called Zen is Right Here. And I'm going to put these 27 in the context of the verse of the robe that we just chanted. You know, most of the time we do 3 bows. As he was developing his students in San Francisco, the students said, why do we do 3 bows? And he said, I don't know, it's traditional, but since, Americans are a little more stubborn, I think we should do 9. And so to this day, in morning service, we do 9 bows in San Francisco and also at Austin Zen Center and some of the traditional temples have that. So today we're going to do 3 times 9. We do 27. And that's part of why I'm in this visual context. I love the great bell. It's a beautiful one. Huh? And I don't know if you can see my finger pointing over here. There's a piece of wood that's sideways. That's actually the giant thing that you pull, and that rings the bell. It's on a rope. So here's a story about the verse of the robe. The English translation that I learned, great robe of liberation, field far beyond form and emptiness, wearing the Tathagata's teaching, saving all beings. Daizai gira buku muso fuku dene ibon yorai ko koro shoshujo in Japanese. So in the 60s, when they started out, they would only chant Japanese because that's all they had. And nobody knew what it meant. There was no translation. So one day, one of the students went to Suzuki Roshi and says, "What's the meaning of that chant that we do right after Zazen?" And he was there with Katagiri, who was young then. He wasn't Katagiri Roshi, He was a teaching assistant for Suzuki. So he was like his straight man, kind of. So this student said, "What does this mean? I don't know the meaning of it." And Suzuki Roshi said, "I don't know." And so Katagiri goes over to the desk and opens the drawer and starts trying to find a translation. And finally Suzuki gestures for him to stop. And he turns to the student and says, "It's love." That's the meaning. So this is where we began, the verse of the robe. It's love. And the first line in our translation, vast is the robe of liberation. A student asked Suzuki, "What is nirvana?" He said, seeing one thing through to the end. Seeing one thing through to the end. Complete, in other words, complete intimacy, complete immersion, complete completeness. Seeing one thing through to the end, including, of course, your own life and the life around you. Another student asked one time, why do we have 40-minute Zazen periods? So when I was training, all of those Zazen periods were 40 minutes. He said, why do we have 40-minute Zazen periods when most Zen teachers in America only have 30? So my legs really hurt when I said for 40 minutes. Won't you consider having 30-minute periods, at least for sesshin, during the intensive? And Suzuki said, well, it's very interesting. I had been thinking maybe we should do 50-minute periods. But then he waited a minute and he said, but maybe we should compromise. Let's do 40. This is the kind of the way he was funny, One time somebody asked him at breakfast, they were drinking coffee and having their breakfast, and a student said, what is hell? And Suzuki said, having to read out loud in English for him. But it's a great response because it's funny and it's light, but it actually shows some of his vulnerability. There's something true about it. And then another student asked the kind of question that gets everybody's attention. They stop because the student said, Roshi, I have a lot of sexual desire. I'm thinking of becoming celibate. Should I try to limit myself in this way? So then everybody waits. And he says, well, sex is like brushing your teeth. It's a good thing to do, but not so good to do it all day long. So he gives people a lot of latitude and yet containment, Vast is the robe of liberation. A formless field of benefaction. A student filled with emotion, weeping, comes to him and says, why is there so much suffering? Many of you have felt this, when you kind of open to this, why is there so much suffering? And he said, no reason. Why? There's no answer to that question. No reason. This is the way it is. And another student asked, does a Zen master suffer in a different way than his students suffer? And he said, in the same way. If not, I don't think the teacher is good enough. We're all in this together in exactly the same way. One of the students asked him one time why the Japanese made their teacups. I guess they had some beautiful porcelain cups or something. He said, why do they make the teacups so thin and delicate and they break so easily? He said, it's not that they're too delicate, but that you don't know how to handle them. You must adjust yourself to the environment, not vice versa. And this is the great teaching, of course. In the West, we think of adjust the environment so we'll be comfortable. Instead of find your way to meet the environment in the fullest possible way, so that it's not damaged. I love this one. One day during a tea break, there was a student standing next to, this was not a formal tea break in Sushin, and just a regular tea break. One of the students was standing next to him and said, so what do you think about all of us crazy, American Zen students? He says, I think you're all enlightened until you open your mouth. But it's such a great teaching because he realizes that everyone's nature is exactly the same, and enlightenment is what he's seeing. And then all the conditioning comes rushing forward. And I'm sure it didn't dissuade or break or disturb his understanding of their perfection. But as a teacher, it's like, oh, okay. But the other side of that is during a break at one of the sessions at Tassajara at the monastery, the student said, I was standing on the bridge overlooking the creek. So on one of the pathways through Tassajara, it's a long valley. The creek goes across and cuts through the valley and goes to the other side of the dining hall. And there's this beautiful bridge. It has some seats on it you can sit on. He said, I stood on the bridge overlooking the creek. It was a beautiful fall day, he said, and the leaves on the trees were all vibrant and alive, and I could see energy coursing through everything. It looked like one of Ed's photos, And Suzuki Roshi came by, and he looked in my eyes, and he said, stay exactly like that. So yes, he could see the conditioning, but he could also see the wakefulness, just like we see in each other. And we see it here, in inquiry and other places. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. So wearing the universal teaching, how do we wear it? What does it look like? One day, once again at Tassajara, he was with a bunch of students, and they gathered up their tools and walked up a hot, dusty trail to work on a project. Now, in the Ventana wilderness, by the way, where Tassajara is, it's pretty dry. A lot of fires, and it's that scrubby, those of you who've been on the coast in California, you know how it is in the mountains. It can be really scrubby and dry. And they were working on a project. They may have been doing a fire break, or they could have been working on the ashes site. There's a beautiful, on the top of a knoll, high above the monastery is where Suzuki Roshi's ashes are, and also some of Trungpa's ashes are there. It's a beautiful place. But when they got to the top of this area where they were going to work, they discovered that they'd forgotten a shovel. They needed a shovel for the work. And so the students began this discussion about who should return and go get it. And they finished their discussion, they turned around, and Suzuki Roshi wasn't there. He was already halfway down the mountain to get the shovel. This is the spirit. Do what's needed now. Just respond with ease and freedom. A woman once told him that she found it really difficult to mix Zen practice with the demands of being a housewife. And the way she said it is, she said, I feel like I'm always trying to climb a ladder, but for every step upward, I slip back 2 steps. Some of you may have felt this, housewife or not. And he said, forget the ladder. In Zen, everything is right here on the ground. Right here on the ground. This is not progression. This is not stepladder Zen. You need the shovel, go get the shovel. This is a wonderful, cheeky one. One time, Suzuki Roshi was being driven back to San Francisco from Los Altos. Now, historically, Los Altos is close on the peninsula, and it was a small sitting group, mostly of women, like these housewives, so to speak. This is the 60s. And the talks he gave in that little living room, basically, were recorded, and those are the talks that became Zen Mind Beginner's Mind. Those talks were not given at San Francisco Zen Center. They were given in this tiny little group. So this person who told the story said, I asked him if there was much hope for that handful of middle-aged suburban housewives to accomplish anything as Zen students. After all, the speaker said, they only sat once a week, and those of us at City Center, were practicing fully. And Suzuki said, well, I think their understanding is actually pretty good. They don't seem to suffer from arrogance. So they kindly, uh, Kyosaku, the stick. And then the reference to the way this collection was originally titled. He would sometimes make this point. He said in the Lotus Sutra, Buddha says to light up one corner of the, not the whole world. Just make it clear where you are. Do your work where you are. Be who you are. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature. I realize the one true nature. I think Lori's actually going to be teaching on this in a certain way coming up, just announced today. So this student said, I had Dokusan, which I spoke about last week with Suzuki during Sesshin, and he said, I felt lost and far from home at that point. I know a lot of you have come to me and with each other in that way, in a dark place in my life. And I asked him if Big Mine was lost in the dark too, when she was lost. And he said, no, not lost in the dark. We're working in the dark. And then she said he began to move his arms around, demonstrating. He said it was like the many-armed statues of Avalokiteshvara, with 1,000 arms. And he made the statue come to life for a moment. You may feel lost, but Big Mind is not lost. It's working in the dark. So you can have confidence, as I was speaking about. But sometimes we get distracted. In another Dokusan, another student said he complained to Suzuki that he was thinking too much. He couldn't stop his thinking. And Suzuki said, what's wrong with thinking? On the other hand, another student got discouraged because he was experiencing these expanded higher states, he called them, but they always went away. Like everything else, when you get high, you always come down. And so he said, what's the use? And Suzuki laughed and said, that's right. No use. All these states come and go. But if you continue your practice, you find there's something underneath. The higher states aren't the deal. Those come and go. What's deeper? What's underneath? And that may seem a little abstract. On the ground, one day, and I think it was actually Ed Brown who had told this story, he said, I complained to Suzuki Roshi about the people I was working with in the kitchen. Ed complained a lot, but a lot of people in the kitchen were not meeting his expectations. And Suzuki said he listened very intently, and he said back, if you want to see virtue, you have to have a calm mind. If you want to see virtue, you have to have a calm mind. During another question and answer period, at the end of a long, a session lecture anyway, someone asked Suzuki Roshi, he said, here I sit, it's the end of session, they've been sitting for a week, energized, and thinking there's so much power in this practice. And some of you felt this, And Suzuki Roshi said quickly, don't use it. Don't make it into a thing, another commodity that you have created. Don't use it. Rest in it. Let it use you. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Thus harmonizing all being. Not beings, harmonizing all being. One time in a lecture, he said, we should practice Zazen like someone who is dying. For that person, there's nothing to rely on. When you reach this kind of understanding, you'll not be fooled by anything. When you're not attached to anything, won't be fooled by anything. There's a lot of teaching in that. It's also some of what I'll be teaching in the Madison retreat in November. Sometimes we do realize things, and in a retreat with two enthusiastic young guys, one of them asked Suzuki Roshi how to maintain the extraordinary states he'd attained. It's, again, I get these extraordinary things. What do I do? Suzuki said, concentrate on your breathing and they'll go away. It's like, they won't bother you anymore. Just concentrate on your breathing. Another student said, as I was telling Suzuki Roshi about the disaster that my life had become, he began to chuckle. And I began to laugh along with him, he said, and there was a pause. And I asked him what I should do, same thing you guys ask. And he said Zazen. He said, life without Zazen is like winding your clock but not setting it. It runs perfectly, but it doesn't tell time. And he elaborated this more during a formal question-answer ceremony in Shoshan. I think I mentioned that, the formal public kind of question-answer. He responded to his student's question, and the student got up from his bow and started to leave. But as he turned to leave, Suzuki added really slow and deliberately, the most important thing, and by the way, if you've read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, there's like, I can't tell, 100 ways he says, the most important thing, different, they're all different. The most important thing is to find out what is the most important thing. And what is that for you? That's what we come to inquiry with. Since there was so many, once again, wild people in the 60s in the Bay Area, an older woman, and by the way, there were a lot of very mature women who sat with Suzuki Roshi. Della Gertz was one of them. She was still alive when I started practicing, and she would sit in the gaitan in the hallway before you go into the zendo, because she couldn't sit on a cushion, but there were chairs. This little tiny woman would sit there. I asked, who is that? And then I saw old pictures from the 60s in the very beginning, and Della had been there since day one. She died a couple of years after I started. But an older woman asked Suzuki Roshi if he felt any pressure and difficulty with the various, kind of ragged, long-haired students, basically off the street, who came seeking enlightenment. And he said, I'm very grateful for them. I will do all I can for them. And you are not so ragged and off the street, but that sentiment really touches me. It's the way I feel. I'm very grateful for you. I'll do all I can for you. And being a psychologist, a clinical psychiatrist once asked Suzuki Roshi about consciousness. What he thought about consciousness. And Suzuki said, I don't know anything about consciousness. I just try to teach my students how to hear the birds sing. Number 27. think this is actually Yvonne Rand. It doesn't say, but I'm pretty sure that's who this was. She said, I went up to Suzuki's room not long before his death because she was caring for him. He was in bed, extremely weak, she said, and his skin was discolored. He had um, a cancer that was associated with his gallbladder and his liver, so he was jaundiced. And she said he bowed, even though he was weak, and I did the same. Then he looked right at me and said, in his very weak voice, don't grieve for me. Don't worry. I know who I am. And this is your task, to begin to know who you are, what this is, who we are. In the overleaf of this book, there's a quote that David Chadwick put in from a writer, um, Carl Buchner, that said, they may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So what is it that you notice now as we've gone through? It's a lot of teachings, but as we just move through it, vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. The teachings all open that thing he said, it's just love, you know. Is there anything you, you want to bring forward?
Hello, Flint,
Hello.
everybody. That's funny you ask the question because right at the beginning when you began to talk, I thought, oh, uh, I know why I became a Buddhist, and I am there, and I will be, and you you let us see a world in which I want to live,
Uh,
in which I want to be and I feel safe, deeply safe. I know there is illness and old age and death. It's not at all idealistic, but the presence of love is so important, and to give and to receive. That just makes the opposite.
yeah,
To
no,
give
that's
and
okay.
to receive. Uh, and after a moment, I realized that yes, give and receive are no more separate. Can I say that like that?
Yes.
It's just going freely. And I think I am an old lady now. I'm 77, and I never saw the world this way, and I never experienced this deep security of who I am and what it is to live. So that's what I wanted to say. But it was very strong. It came suddenly, and
It's landing very strong in me. I have tears in my eyes. It's very strong. What you're saying makes everything worthwhile.
my daughter is gone, and I have her dogs, and it's always something like a burden. Oh, 3 dogs and on. And this time they are all finding their place, and I make a place for each of them, and it's absolutely easy. They are dogs, they are not human beings, but it's such a deep shift. So thank you very much,
You know who you are. Thank you.
and thank you all.
Yes, it requires everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Hi, Flint. Um, and it's probably just a repeat of what Claudine said, but I think it's worth repeating. And just to say thank you for keeping us well cared for, well fed, well informed, and well inspired.
There's nothing else I'd rather do.
And you do it well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a meeting. If you don't show up, it doesn't happen.
There you go.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Hi, Lisa.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can. When I saw you come originally, when we first opened the door today, I saw you. I thought, oh, Lisa's going to raise her hand. I hope she is.
Well, I feel really teary. I'm very surprised to be back here.
Hmm.
I haven't been here for quite a long time.
Yeah, that's what I noticed.
Yeah. And so I had a small cardiac event back in April.
Oh,
Nothing really serious, just something called a flutter, a little bit like a fib, and possibly related to valve repairs during my auto accident of 12 years ago.
right.
What that led to was concern about me having a stroke. So I had to get on these stupid medications, one of which I've gotten off, but my body is just overall very, very sensitive to
Yeah.
a lot of things, including pharmaceuticals. Um, yeah, so I literally, could barely function. I lost all interest in a lot of things. And I had no energy, to come forth on Tuesdays. And at the same time, I mean, all of a sudden my meditation practice stopped. I literally, the side effects of this medication are so profound that I could, like saying, well, you can't breathe anymore. I mean, it was the loss of a function, bodily function in a way.
What
So,
brought you today?
huh?
What brought you today?
Yeah, well, I experienced a huge amount of grief. And I thought I'll never be back. And I thought it's odd how do you know when to say goodbye?
That's the
So,
question.
yeah, how do you know? You just say goodbye and you're gone, but you don't know when it's happening. Anyhow, what brought you today, getting me back focused, is just being so determined. So determined that I don't feel alive in the way I want to. I'm behaving in ways I'm not being the person I enjoy being when I come here to inquiry and am involved in my practice. It's like, even if
Just
I'm not
keep.
the way I want to be, it's like the connection's really important. The community is really important. No matter what other practices I try to compensate with. I don't know. I've had to do a lot of things to get myself to where I could show up today because I guess I didn't
Yeah,
want to give it up. How about that? I'm not ready to give up, regardless of the
good.
obstacle.
Don't give up.
That's enough.
You're ready. If you were ready to say goodbye at some point, if the goodbye comes, or if my goodbye comes, if one of our goodbyes comes because we are passing, then I'm willing to meet yours. Are you willing to meet mine?
Yeah.
Okay. And until then, let's just keep going.
Thank you, Flint. Thank you, Sangha.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I'm going to just say this as sometimes you can't do much. And it's like the day I brought the incenser to you in the wheelchair because you couldn't get up. That's what today is. I didn't hear what you said. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and it's okay. It's okay to grieve for the loss of this community, for the loss of being able to be present and still be alive. I mean, if I were dead and not present, it'd be fine. But being alive and not being able to be present, you know what I mean? That's different.
It is different. It's actually harder. And being able to grieve means you're alive.
Mm,
That's part of aliveness.
yeah. Yeah. So thank you. I'm glad to be here today. And that's it.
Good. I'm glad we didn't miss that part. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Flint.
Hi.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa, for the grieving, because I'm sort of a little bit in that space, maybe more than that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just well, first of all, thank you for all those little anecdotes. I appreciate Suzuki Roshi's humor and his giggles, and it's just it's helpful. Two things. So the grieving is just about when I'm not doing the job that I have been doing for a long time. And I'm just realizing how dependent I've been on it being me. Like, that's me. You go to
Yeah, the
someone,
identity.
well, yeah, like, what do you do? Well, yeah, I'm a therapist. And yeah, just sometimes it feels, well, yeah, like, well, who am I? And I don't know in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways I do know, but um
Well, that's the koan. When you no longer say, when I no longer say, I am a therapist, that I don't identify as that, that's a function that I may have done well and for a long time, but it's a function of this. What is this? That functioned as that. That's the Zen, that's the backward step. That's the turn that you're doing in your practice.
yeah, and what I'm amazed at in this moment is how much calmer I am than when we were sitting and while Lisa was speaking, and I think just hearing the stories, hearing you relate them and relating them to us as our teacher, and saying, when the student asked him, yeah, the older woman, I think, what about these bedraggled hippies? And he said, I will do everything that I can. They're very important to me. And when you said that to us,
That's it.
that was very, very special. And
I don't want to leave anything out. I want to give you everything.
means so much. Um, yeah. And just being here and uh, acknowledging that what I'm experiencing is part of this whole thing. It's not me and I think that's what happens with me when I'm making a change or a change happens. It closes up and it's me and I have to figure it out, and this is a challenge to that way, and
Yeah.
it's helpful.
Well, and that's why in the meditation, and each person who's spoken really has demonstrated a little bit of this breath meditation, taking in the world, offering it back, taking it in, letting it go. That's the only cycle we're in. And exactly what you just gestured and what you're talking about. And then when it's over, as Lisa said, then no problem, which is actually another Suzuki Roshi story.
Well, I liked that part when he said, like, if you act like you are dead, like, or dying, you're very freed. And
Yeah.
that was kind of an interesting
Yeah.
thing to think
Someone,
about.
someone asked him one time, what is zazen? He said, when you're sitting and you're breathing in that exhale down at the bottom where everything is still for a moment, he said like that. And then If you're alive, you'll breathe in. And if you're not, no problem.
And thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
so much.
always for your steadiness.
Thank you.
I have
We have
lightning round with Sue and Chris.
2 minutes, two people. Okay. Sue.
Well, thank you, Flint. Really appreciate this. And at the beginning, when you said, this is all things that when I hear it, I think, yeah, somewhere deep in me, I know that. And that just kept happening over and over and over. And the second thing is, it was very touching to watch how your talk touched you. You could just feel how deep that was. And thank you for sharing yourself in that way with us.
I don't know another way, so thank you for receiving me that way. Thank you. Hey, Chris. There you go. Does it work?
I think, yes.
Yep, got it.
So I just wanted to quickly say I went to a concert of the Blind Boys of Alabama on Friday night here at UMass. And at one point, these are really old men. And at one point, or at several points, one of them would get so taken up that he would jump out of his chair and somebody would have to come and lead him back to his chair because I think they were afraid he'd have a heart attack. And the audience was standing and singing and clapping. And in the middle of all this noise, I mean, this loud, stuff, I thought, it wasn't that I thought, I experienced, this is Zen. This is Zen. And I felt you there, and I felt everybody else who come to the inquiry there. And I knew it was exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It just reminds me when my dear friend Steve Stuckey, who was abbot at San Francisco Zen Center, he died a few years ago of pancreatic cancer. And he wrote his death poem, and then afterward he put in a line from Blind Lima Johnson.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. But I don't mind dying. I just hate to see my children crying. Yeah, but I understand the spirit you're talking about, and that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's intone the 4 practice principles together, okay? Caught in the
Self-centered dream, only suffering.
Holding
Cool.
to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. Thank you.
Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity, and your support makes a huge difference. There's a link for contributions on the website, and I have just posted it in the chat as well. And a very happy birthday to Sheila Fling. She's here today, and it's her birthday. Thank you all. Stay after if you can. I'm going to hand the controls over to Maria. Bye-bye.